And we are live. How is everybody? I hope you guys are all well. Got a kitty. Hi, kitty. Um, you are watching Radical Souls podcast. My name is Amale, and we are going to talk about protection today. And so I hope that you guys are excited. I love this topic for this week. There's been a lot of synchronicities around this word. And so we're going to talk about just all kinds of protection, maybe forms of self protection that we have. And I don't think it is going to be too long of a stream today, but I do have some notes. And so we'll get started on that. The cats are going to go crazy. Okay. So, protection and what that looks like, and why am I even bringing it up? And what are other what are all the ways of that we protect ourselves? So in the last couple streams, I've talked a lot. The cat is going nuts. Um, talked a lot about. We talked about lack or scarcity, just those feelings of inadequacy. We've talked about. Um, what is it, kitty? Just want to freak out? Okay. Um, we've talked about. Hi, Barbara. Welcome, welcome. We've talked about just all kinds of different topics, and so this one kind of naturally occurred, especially with Andrew Tate being um, uh, detained. I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know what they call it in Romania, but there's a lot of people that are coming out in defense of him, and that's naturally going to be occurring. But I really want to talk about how or why somebody gets to that point, and how we as parents or friends can help identify and protect against these things that happen. Barbara, you're gonna have to never mind the cat. Like as soon as it was quiet up until I started talking, and now it's like flipping a wig. Um, so protection, like we all want to feel protected, and I think many of us will start reaching out to outward sources to do that. And so the first thing, or the first people that protect you are your parents. Yeah, it's pretty funny. So we're just gonna have to listen to it. It's gonna be fine. Um, but the first people that are protecting you as a child that you're born are your parents. And that's even before you're born, it's like at the time of conception. Because a parent, like when I was had a baby growing in me, obviously I'm thinking like this is important. This child is important to me. I'm going to protect the child that's in my womb, and so like that first part of it starts there. So both of the parents are kind of working together, like, okay, we've made this baby, now we're going to protect this baby. And it's a little daunting. It's a little trying process. Okay, we've made this baby, now we're going to protect this baby. And it's a little daunting. It's a little trying process. Um, so as we start as a baby and as we go into adulthood, this need or desire to have this protection um, is going to follow you. And I have I really want to talk about King David and kind of his life that he went through, and I'm going to talk about what our relationships are like with our parents, and we'll talk a little bit about honor your father and your mother, because I think that also has a lot to do with um, protection as well. And we'll also talk about Psalm 23, which is a promise of protection while you're going through an evil or wicked situation, that you feel like everything around you is almost suffocating, um, but that we desire that protection from God. Okay, so you start as a baby and you've got these 2 parents and they're taking care of you and they're protecting you. Um, and so as a baby, a lot of that resides with the mother. And the mother, I'm Native American, and for us, the children stay with the mother or the women of the tribe. And then around age 7, the boys separate off and they go start learning hunting and things that the men do to be a part of their community or their society. And then the girls, they go off to with the women and they start learning how to be a part of that society. All the meanwhile, from the age that they're born up until this age, they're staying with the elders and they're staying with the women primarily. Just every day to day, they're doing all kinds of things to one, be tended to, and then to learn what they need to do. And I think that age of 7 is almost a break off point, and it kind of naturally, I think, happens in our life where we're like, okay, now they're age 7. You can even notice as a child, or even psychologically, if you like studied any psychology, you would know that at the age of 7 is when children are going from one stage where they're like really dependent to this stage of beginning to be a little bit more independent, and they have a vocabulary and they have certain motor skills that they're able to kind of keep continue going into that until they get to their teenage years, which is where they go from being really childlike into early adulthood, and that's when they're starting to actually um, really have a little bit more independence and a little bit more emotional, um, what do you want to say, understanding, where they're starting to socially get to know peers in their group and prepare for adulthood. And it was different. It was way different back in agrarian society. Well, for one, people didn't live for a long period of time. So the lifespan was very much different than it was in today's time. If you were higher up in a society, there was a lot of caste systems or hierarchies. If you were up higher, there was a likelihood that you would be living along a lot longer because you would have a little bit more protection versus being um, of a lower caste where you're having to go out and work these really crazy jobs and survive. And so in our society today, we have so much protectionism. We have so much protection. So we have this government protection. We have police, fire, ambulance. We have all these things that hospitals, medicine, like all these things are at hand to give us an air of protection so that we can have a longer life. We're trying to protect this longer life on this planet or on this realm and continue to go beyond what these agrarian societies experienced. So now it's kind of interesting that we have almost this childlike um, youth where before, when you're at age 12 to 15, you're experiencing this transformation, and now it's kind of pushed out to where you're in your late 20s and you're still like don't know what you're doing with your life, whereas like before you might have a little bit more idea, okay, I'm going to do this, and then just kind of grow from there. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon to consider, and it I don't know how to explain it, but it is something that is quite the phenomenon. Okay. So our parents have so much to do with how we handle life. Not only are they protecting us, so we have a mother and a father, and a mother is there and she's nurturing you and giving you certain emotional understanding. And then you have your father who is there, that is giving you like a fatherly comfort, a protection. Um, And so when we look at how these two play out, like if you have a father who's just not there, or is cruel, there's going to be a certain reaction within you versus having a mother who's like that. Maybe a mother who's distant, or um, is is maybe there but not there. That's going to have some sort of effect on you as well. And I'm thinking about this from my own personal experience of, how did I go about without having that fatherly role in my life, and how did my mother's um, interaction with me and how that played out, how did that shape me as a person? Because that's really all I have to gauge against is myself. What is it, kitty? Kitty? Um, And so this is why I bring up this honor your father and your mother, which is a commandment with a promise. It's the first commandment with a promise. So I think it falls under the fifth commandment. Um, honor your father and your mother is so important because regardless of however those roles played out, um, giving them honor and really appreciating them, forgiving them if you have to, and letting go of things that you may have certain expectations under is super important. How does this play out? So, for me, like me not having a father figure in my life almost gave me this really strong desire to one, search for God. Like it gave me this really strong urge to search for God. Like I needed to fill that emptiness that lack that I was feeling. And so because of that, now I can look at it. I had to really it was really hard for me to admit it, but I had to say, you know what, I don't trust God. And here's some of the reasons why. Like I had this lack in my life. And because that lack was there, I was trying to fill it with relationships with men who were not giving me what I actually needed, which was a close connection to God. And that is an outward. I think we talked about it last time, but it's an outward reach for something that's internal. That's internal because of that lack that I felt inside. I was reaching out for men that I thought would fill that role for me, that would be be able to protect me in the way that I thought, that would be able to walk with me as I tried to get onto a proper life path, because you already know that there's going to be some sort of um, there's already a disconnect, I think. And maybe you don't know it, but as you like kind of reflect on yourself, you'll start to see the patterns. And if not you, then maybe somebody else will. And it plays out in your life. So somebody had posted two men, one had mommy issues, one had daddy issues. Um, And I wrote this was kind of just off the cuff thing that I wrote. I said, "This is why honor your father and mother is a commandment. They are part of your genetic makeup." So these two individuals, mother and father, are coming together and they're making you. And so you have aspects of the mother, you have aspects of the father, and that's inside of you. That's your DNA, if you want to like put it to science. Those two parts of you are in your DNA. Thus, for your mother, their parents are also in you. So you have this connection to your ancestors. They're part of your genetic makeup. And could it be how sins or curses are passed down? So, a lot of people, they'll have these continual issues. Maybe their father was just physically abusive, emotionally abusive, just beat the crap out of their child. And if the mother isn't there, kind of intervening and protecting the child, then there's going to be a deviance. There's going to be this curse that's almost passed down because of whatever the reason is for them to go and physically abuse somebody. And I'm talking beyond like your standard discipline. I'm talking like, you know, um, beating them to the point of where it's considered cruel. So I think this cruelty is not just on the father's side, it's also on the mother's side. I've experienced two different relationships where both of these things were core parts of the men that were expressing these things. They're candidly telling me like these are the things that happened to me. My mother beat the crap out of me all the time. I reminded her of her father, and she couldn't get at her father, so she took it out on me. And they knew that. They expressed that clearly. And because of that, they almost have this like desire to fill that role of the mother protecting them, and so they'll seek out women that have more motherly roles, which is why women like me who have this really strong motherly, nurturing, loving personality attracts these men that have this really deep pain of like how their mother treated them, and now they're getting somebody that can fill that. Oh, my mom didn't treat me like that, but you'll maybe it's the same, like, they'll want to relive that trauma, or maybe it's different where they're wanting to find somebody that's completely opposite of that to fill whatever need is, and it plays out differently in everyone's lives. Um, so we talked about motherly and fatherly, like, how these 2 forms of, abuse or cruelty can happen. So, it's obviously gonna be a little bit more difficult for a woman to intervene into a man's abuse if he's abusing the children. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for the woman to do that because, hi, Cozy Phantom. Welcome, welcome. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to intervene because, one, women are just biologically or physiologically physically different than men, where they're built differently, and we're meant for nurturing and caring for children and being there, um, and being them there for them. Whereas, like men, I would say vice versa. If a mother is being severely abusive, the father should step in and say, "Don't treat the children like that." Um, Port Bear, awesome, aw, cute. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Port Bear. So, as parents, if you're not intervening in cruel situations, or maybe you're not like necessarily saying anything to that parent, but you're protecting the child by like pulling them aside and explaining, like, you know, maybe your father is acting this way because of this, and it's not anything to do with you, and really trying to intervene into that situation to where that is going to be okay. You know what, my mother kind of explained it to me, and at the time maybe I didn't understand it, or she tried to explain it in words I could understand, and hopefully you're able to communicate with your children to intervene into that kind of situation. But um, as we like continue on, those lacks or those um, abusive or cruel experiences are going to play out in different ways. And um, I'm very much a believer that we all have free will, that we can make these decisions to um, be in agreement with them or break the curse. So we have a choice to do one or the other. And so that's where those genetic sins, or generational sins, I would call them, come up. Okay. Um, so I said I've dealt with daddy issues my entire life. It has led me to not trust God. So that was a really hard admission that I had to come up with, and I came up with it um, as I'm really working to correct it. Like, I want to trust God. I want to have that really solid relationship with God and with heaven, and be connected to the kingdom of heaven. And you can't do that if you're not trusting God. I mean, I think we can all agree with that. Um, and then I said, I realized there were parts of me that were not protected by my mother, which led me to understand that single parenting causes an added stress from lack of both parents. So when you have a single parent situation, a lot of the times that one parent is compensating for the other parent and they're unable to do that. It's a lot harder job to do that. And I'm not saying that it's like everything is, oh, you have to like push the reset button because like there is no reset button in life. Like you're going to have to really kind of deal with the circumstances that you're given. And God is not going to give you circumstances that you're unable to handle. So you are well in abundance with all of the necessary tools to get yourself out of whatever situation it is. And it doesn't have to be, a physical situation. It could be an emotional situation or a mental situation. He's given you all these tools within to handle whatever the situation is. And everyone is going to be different. We're all going to have our unique lessons or our unique tribulations that we're going to need to assess and get through. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because I have some good stuff on that. Um, added stress from both lack of both parents. And I love my mother dearly, like very truly dearly. I love my mother. Like my mother is amazing. And despite everything that I've gone through, like my love for her like cannot be broken. Like I absolutely adore my mother. And it's a little bit harder for my father. I don't have any ill feelings towards him. I know that, he was going through whatever he was going through, and whatever that was, it included me to a certain degree, but I was like not there, not existent for him. And that's something that like I said, God has equipped me. I'm able to deal with those things. And um, it's made me who I am today. And I can appreciate that. So um, I love my father. I forgive him. And, God rest his soul. Like he had to deal with a lot of generational curses himself. And so I am given the opportunity to end those curses if I really trust God to help me do that. Okay. So, as I was saying, I'm just reading from a post that I had written. I've been around men who have severe physical abuse from both mother or father and had no protection from that abuse. They are both still scared children. So, um, I don't know if it's like a common thing, but I've noticed like from the time that I realized that my father was non-existent, because before a certain period of time, age 14, I didn't even realize that this lack was there. All I knew was, oh, okay, like I'm growing. And then as soon as I hit age 13, 14, I had a conversation with my dad that changed my life. It almost pivoted me into this crossroads. And it was really difficult for me to go through because I kind of went through it blindly. Um, Barbara says, I wasn't able to be a daddy's girl until my 30s. God is good. Yeah. And, I don't even know if I am going to be able, I'm hoping that I can be a daddy's girl if I can put like God the Father in that. So it has affected my relationships on a very deep level, and we can get into that. But so at age 14, 13, 14, I had this conversation with my father, and it was on the phone. And I hadn't really talked to him all that much. I remember like maybe one memory from when I was 3, 2 or 3, and from then on, I don't remember anything. Because there is no memory of me being with him. And so age 14, we have this conversation on the phone. So it's on a speakerphone. We're on a cordless phone, in the 90s was a big deal. So we have this phone, I have it on speakerphone, and he calls and he's drunk. And so it's me and my 2 brothers, my mom. and we're all sitting in the living room. And I remember this very vividly, but I didn't realize like how much of an impact it had until later on in my life. So we're sitting there, and he's like drunk, and he's like, "I'm already dead. Don't worry about me. I'm already dead." And that's all he would say. That's all he could say. And we were kind of laughing about it, like giggling, like, "Oh, that's funny." But the impact that that had in my life, it changed the direction that I was going because it made me realize, like, um, and I realized this later, and you guys could say yay or nay, but it made me think, like, it almost planted the seed that God is dead, and He's already dead, and don't worry about Him. So you have this father figure coming into your life. I had this father figure come into my life and tell me, "I'm already dead. Don't worry about me. I'm already dead." And it's interesting because I look at, where my life was going, and I was doing really well in school, getting straight A's. And then from then on, it was like I'm making poor decisions, like skipping school and doing all the random 14, 15, 16-year-old things that a woman, a young lady should not be doing. And I got myself strung up into bad relationships and poor friendships, and eventually was kicked out of the house. So um, I kind of look back at my life, and I'm like, okay, I kind of feel like a 14-year-old girl still sometimes. Like I'm still stuck in that 14-year-old girl um, part of my life cycle. And because of that, and then, there's these other situations that are happening that, I'm not really going to broadcast too much, but there were these other situations that were happening that I'm like, oh, okay. As I'm looking back with my experience and my wisdom, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see where why that took this trajectory. So, by the time I was 16, I was like, I'd really like to be in a relationship with somebody, growing together with them, you know, building a home. Like that's age 16. I'm desiring that. But because of that one trauma that I couldn't get over, um, I was almost frantic. It put me into a really it's like a really anxious or afraid or um, just almost where you can't relax state. And so my relationships with men, because I'm so anxious, I can't actually be in a good relationship, like be present in one that is fruitful, that will give me these things that, deeply on my inward parts, like I desire, like to have these things. Like this is my what I imagine. So any guy that I meet, I'm like, okay, this is the one. Okay, this is the one. And I think a lot of women experience this because we've been let down, and there's really not a lot of people out there talking about how candidly talking about these situations where, okay, I'm able to kind of get through this. This is the reason why I'm this way, and here's how I'm going to play out the rest of my life. Cozy Phantom is saying she relates. So these are these are real issues, and luckily I've heard a lot of stories from people that kind of corroborate these things. But for these men that we're talking about, um, I feel like whatever age that their mother took it too far and then just continued with it, um, and never asked for forgiveness of her children, and then the child could never forgive the parents that abused them. I think where you'll see like how these mommy issues and daddy issues come into play, because they don't have to be there. They're not always there. This isn't oh, if this then this. It's not like that. You totally have free will decisions to continue down whatever road you're in. Okay. So continuing, I'm speaking as an observer and experiencer. Honor your father and mother as best as you can. It comes with a promise, the promise of a long life, and that it will be well with you. And our goal in our this life is 120 years. And so if you want the long life, um, really working on forgiving and correcting these things and honoring your parents for who they are, where they came from, and in whatever ways that they protected you. So maybe my dad protected me by not communicating with me up until age 14. Maybe up until age 14, like those are my formative years. And then finally, when I do have that conversation with him, even though I went down this whole rabbit hole of craziness, I still can come out and look at it from an experience point of view and say, okay, maybe this story is something that can help people heal. The story is a story that I can learn from to help heal myself as well. And um, so there really is something to this, and it is one of the 10 commandments for a reason. So um, I think it's uh, I think it's kind of a good thing to kind of meditate on if you're having issues with your mother and your father and figuring out what ways. And I see it all the time, like, well, maybe not all the time, but I've seen it enough times going through like reels, and you see these kids and they're kind of just like spoiled, and the parents are like trying to take away their video games, but they gave them to them, and you're like, okay. And then you're seeing them just come unhinged and like destroy property or whatever because they're unable to emotionally like express or even be even be conscious enough to say, oh, okay, like they've got this really deep desire to just be held up in the video game or whatever. And that's not the only occurrence in our society. We see it all the time, with just our generations right now are very youthful, and they're almost stuck in this permanent youth, almost a failure to launch um, experience. And this goes for people that are, in their 30s, their 40s, and this can continue on just depending on what the situation is. Okay, and then I continue on, and I'll just read this really quick. Forgive them, ask God to break family curses in the name of Jesus. Ask it often. And if you guys want a prayer, there is a prayer that asks for all the generational curses, any soul contracts, any contracts that are binded to you, are bound to you, to release them. And I'm happy to share that. It's a very nice thing that one of my friends shared with me. Ask it often. It is possible these things can end with you. Love them, love your parents, and keep them. Keep your parents in your heart, and want as much good for them as possible, and take care of them when you can too. And then finally, as parents, when you have children, or maybe you're an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, protect your children. So protect your children, protect your grandchildren, protect your nieces and nephews, anybody who is in your that you're close to, protect them, because you don't know how much of an impact that will be later on in their life. And I want to I want to really point out, I say, especially the inner child, the one who has, especially the inner child who has new wisdom and experience to fight off the abuse and protect them now, because time isn't linear. So, what does it mean time isn't linear? Like I can go and, sit with myself and really kind of imagine young Amelie on the phone there, and instead of snickering, I could just be like, after hang up the phone and give her a hug. Like, I'm really sorry that you had to hear that. I'm really sorry that that made you believe that you couldn't trust God, or however you want to word it. But just think back to that child, where whatever the situation is. I'm going to love you. I'm protecting you right now, because I'm going to tell you that what he said is not true, or what she said is not true, how whatever the situation is and whatever the truth you need to hear is. Um, because we're all children. Like, regardless of where we're at in life, every single one of us is a child. We're a child of God. We're children physically here in this realm, and um, you need to be protected. And we'll get into some of the spiritual stuff on it, but um, these are, I think, protecting children will help you, especially if you have your own children and you're able to protect them and actively. I think that's why when people become parents, like the men just have this really overwhelming feeling of protecting that child, and it changes you, changes your DNA, changes the way you eat. I mean, there's so much change that goes on when you do experience having children, and raising them, or even having uh, nieces and nephews or cousins, whatever it is, like whatever child, and love them and protect them and be around them as much as possible to give them that experience. Okay, there's hopefully no questions. We kind of went over um, a whole business of how protection and honoring your father and your mother really relate to these things. Um, and so it's really important for you to not sit as a victim of those experiences. You're here now. You can change it now. And you have the strength to change it. You've made it this far. Wherever you're at, you made it this far. And maybe some of you are like me and we're like, I didn't even think I'd make it past 30. I didn't think I'd make it past 25. That's how despair laden I was. Like, that's how dangerous I lived my life. I didn't think I was going to make it past those ages. I couldn't imagine it. It was very painful, but I did make it, and and you did too. You made it through some crazy ass shit. That's all I'm going to say. And, you know, glory be to God for you getting through that. Okay, so now I want to move into part of the reason why I chose protection was one, this honor your father and your mother portion of it. But then also I was listening to Psalms and it was really speaking to me of that protection that we experience and the love that we want. We want to be loved and protected. I think many of us can appreciate that, especially the women. This is like it's a super rewarding thing to have that. So King David is one of the huge Old Testament characters. And so, because you have Adam, then it's like David, I think it's like, I can't remember how many generations it is, but I think it's 14, 14, 14. Um, and then you get to Jesus. And so you have these characters, but in the middle here, you have King David. And you're like, okay, what does King David have to do with protection? Well, King David is known as a man after God's own heart. And why is it that I have these um, five things that make King David kind of stand apart from all these other Old Testament characters, or as Postelfet called it, or whatever the guys called it, they call them the Dora stories. I thought that was really funny. I don't know why. When I was writing my notes, I was laughing about that. Um, so some things that King David did. So he did a lot of like pretty terrible things. He had a man killed. He took a woman that wasn't his. And when he was confronted with it, he was like, oh my gosh, that man, needs to pay for that. And, the priest is like, yeah, it was you, bro. Um, and what did he do? He didn't say, oh, well, I'm the king. Like, I can do whatever I want. And he, no, he didn't do that. He was really repentant in his heart, like, "Oh my gosh, my transgressions are so strong in my life. I'm very weak." And he acknowledges that. So he acknowledges his mistakes. So these are all characteristics of King David as you read through First Samuel and Second Samuel. I think is more King Solomon, but so First Samuel, you can read that. It's great. It's one of my favorite reads. It's very adventurous. So you have that he acknowledged his mistakes. He has the humility to recognize his weaknesses. So he realizes, "Oh, I fell short." And he doesn't like try to rise above that with pride. He sits in that in humility, like, "Oh, I really messed up." So he recognizes where his weaknesses are. He has the courage to step up in challenging situations. So that one, like I think the most famous one is the day was facing off to Goliath. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but he faces Goliath, which is a giant, and he's a child. Hi, Hobbit Bear. Welcome, welcome. He has a strong passion and love for God, and then he has the strength to change and accept change. So, despite being having all of these wonderful characteristics of being a humble yet really strong man, he faced many armies. It's incredible how many armies he faced. But he was he's a man after God's own heart, but his children after he becomes king, his children rebel against him. So he's got many wives, he's got many children, and his children start rebelling against him. And maybe it's because of he's having many wives and not really, being with his children that they're kind of rebelling against him as well. I've been reading a bit about Elijah. That's some good stuff right there. Elijah's pretty based. Um, but his children rebelled against him. And, after he passes away and King Solomon reigns, even King Solomon makes mistakes. And, we can't judge his heart, so we don't know what that's all about. Um, but one of the big things, and we kind of talked about that, was him facing Goliath. So Goliath is a Philistine and very much against the Israelites. He's 9 foot 9 inches in our imperial system. 9 foot 9. I think my ceiling right now is not even 9 foot 9. Okay. It says in the Bible that he's 6 cubits in a span. And so 6 cubits is about 17 and a half inches. So you times that by six, it's I think about 105 inches. And then a span, you're looking at a, I think that's from the hip to the end of the arm. That's how they would measure. And so you're looking at a really tall individual. And this guy is like talking all kinds of smack against the army that King Saul has, all the men in the infantry. None of them want to go out and face him. And then maybe the ones that went out and faced him, they died. They couldn't face him. So David's strolling along. He comes up. He's going to check on his brothers. He had three brothers. He's the youngest of eight. He has three brothers. So he goes up and he's checking on his brothers for his dad. And he hears Goliath mocking God's people. He's like, well, that's not right. And so he's probably about 15. They estimate he's probably about 15, 18 years old, somewhere in there. So very much a child in our, you know, what we would consider consensual adult. He's not a consensual adult. He's still a child. In fact, him going, he was just supposed to check on them. Him going and joining the army, you weren't allowed to join until you were 20. Um, so he's a fairly young man. He's in his teenage years, and he's ready to face Goliath. God's put it in his heart that he is going to face this giant. And this is, a part of where God gives you the strength when you acknowledge your weaknesses. Um, God is protecting you when you're doing things according to his will. So he goes up and he faces Goliath. And what is going on, Moon King? So he's going up and he's facing this Goliath, and he beats him against all odds. Nobody else wants to go and um, face off to Goliath, but David does, and he hits him right square in his pineal, I think, and he dies. I think it says like the rocks, the pebbles sank into his head, so it hit him right in his brain, and he dies. And all of the Philistines are upset. Like that is their champion. And here this little kid is. I think he came out. Did Goliath have Down syndrome? I don't think he did. I don't think he'd be as angry if he did. But so God protected him. He kind of helped him to understand. So he grew up as a shepherd boy. He was protecting all the sheep. And so he would go up against lions, he'd go against bears. So he had to fight all these creatures. And so as he's a young man, he's fighting all these creatures and learning that he can face things that he can probably, like many of us would perceive, are stronger than us. He's able to go through and attack it head on because he has this confidence that comes with being protected by God. So he is a really good read if you want to read about some of the things that he went through. There's going to be a lot of things that he did that were questionable. He was not a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination, but it's because of how he was in his heart, how he would admit to falling short, how he would admit that his transgressions and his weakness were really nothing, and that he would lay that down. That he didn't want to be in that situation. He didn't want to be in that. Um, he didn't want that to have be defining him. Okay. Um, so King David he's a author of many of the Psalms. And so as I'm listening to these Psalms, it's really funny because, we have this boxing match that's going to go down this year, and we're getting all psyched and pumped up for it. And so I'm just like, okay, watching the strategies, because that's how I am. I'm very much strategy oriented. I'm like, okay, what's the strategy here? What's the game plans? What's going on behind the scenes? I don't really much care for too many boxing matches, but this one is like a couple of friends, and I'm just like watching. Okay, and one of them's like, oh yeah, like super humble about it, and I'm like, you can't really have that. You gotta have heart going into it, right? And he's like, no, you should be a little bit humble. And I'm like, oh no, 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 no. And then I'm listening to Psalms, and I'm like, there may be some truth to that. um, says one of the comments say from Hobbit says Samson is another one that really demonstrates the strength we can have if we trust God and God's power. Absolutely. Um, yeah. So the Book of Judges is it comes right not before, but it's one of them before that. If you want to read about the judges of Israel, um, those are really interesting as well. There's a lot of archetypes in that um, that can be really interesting. So anyways, as we're working through as King David is working through this, then as King David, sorry, as King David is going through these psalms, I'm not just like listening to uh I'm listening to these psalms and I'm thinking, man, he was really humble. He was really going to God first. And as he's like facing off against these different peoples like the Philistines and the Amalekites and all these people, he first goes to God and he's like, um, what should I do? What should what should I do, God? What like these people are coming up against me. Like there's a point where like both of his he had two wives that were taken from Ziklag, and so he's like really upset about it. All the people are upset. They're weeping. All the people are weeping because they burned the city down, and his his wife Abigail and another one of his wives are they're in the city, and they're a couple of them that got taken away, and he's like, "What do I do?" So he goes to the priest, asks for an ephod, and then pray, and then really asks God, like, "What do I do against this?" And God's like, "I'm going to be there with you, so please." Um, uh, he's gives him permission, like, "I will be with you. You will destroy all those, and you'll recover everything," which is what happened. And so they're all like dancing and having fun because they just pillaged and burned down the city. And David comes in and just destroys them all. Says from evening until morning, destroys them all. So it's a really cool thing to see how protection plays out in David's life, how approaching God, uh, wanting him to protect you, but then still having the strength to make whatever his will is. Like if God is saying to do something, then you go and do it. Did King David have any pets? Barbara said just sheep. Hilarious. Um, I don't want to be on for too long. I think I did a long stream last time. But you guys feel free to put in your ideas. I think I went over quite a few different concepts of how parents relate and how God is protecting. And we'll talk a little bit more. I'm just going to just kind of give you guys a little bit more leeway. If you have any questions or you have any comments that you want to share, that'd be awesome. Moon King says, God gave me a beautiful idea for a project. I hope everyone loves it when it's finished. I'm sure it will be wonderful, Moon King. So one of the most famous psalms is the Lord is my shepherd, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me in all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thanks, Hobbit Bear. It's interesting that King David was a protector of Israel, but didn't protect his daughter, causing his children to rebel. Yeah, and, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm like, "Man, David is a man after God's own heart, and it's because of all these things that he's doing. He's very repentant. Um, he's a very strong leader, when it comes to, like, being a leader in battle. He loves God, like, is really loves God, but he still makes these, errors. He still has these sins that happen, and that, like, it's very nice for me to kind of think about, okay, King David like this, so it's, like, I don't have to be so judgmental and almost, I don't wanna say hateful towards myself, but that's kinda how it, comes out to. It's like you have this really strong judgment against yourself because you fall short, and you're like, "Oh, man, I really messed up." Hi, Jonah. Hi, Luke. Um, so why am I bringing this all up? Like, our parents obviously have a lot to do with who we are and how we, can fulfill the fifth commandment of honor your father and your mother. And I think all of these things we really need to kind of address, get them out of the way, like be in forgiveness, and then be ready to go on to the next level. Because I think we're on a path where we can be growing to almost be into, I don't know how to say it, but be, um, in two places at once, basically. So, like, you're here on this realm, and you're also in heaven in a spiritual realm. And so, I think, who was reading about Elijah? I was reading about Elijah. Okay, so Hobbit says he's reading about Elijah. So, Elijah is one of those, uh, characters in the Old Testament who did end up not dying. He was taken up in a chariot of fire. So he's taken up in a chariot of fire, right? He doesn't have an earthly death. Aw, thanks, Cozy Phantom Bear. I'm glad you enjoy them. Um, he's getting taken up in a chariot of fire. He doesn't experience death. Elisha is watching him, getting a double portion, getting his double portion of the things that Elijah went through. And Elijah is the character that went through all that stuff with Ahab and Jezebel. So that is an interesting read. And that, I think, comes in the book of, the Kings. I think that's part of the book of the Kings. Another day in paradise. Awesome. Moon King says we all make errors and mistakes. It's how we become stronger and successful. Yeah. Well, for a long time, I was very judgmental of me, just like not being perfect. Um, and that's part of being an anxious female character. Is you're like trying to be perfect because, you're lacking. And I talked about that in extent last, episode. So if you want to really get into why that is a thing, go listen to that. Um, that's a that was a an hour 30-minute stream just on scarcity and how that shows up in your life. Oh, Moon King, you're so sweet. Copper is an awesome person. Thank God for her. You're awesome. You guys are all awesome. I appreciate you all. Okay, so Elijah is one of those characters. Enoch is one of those characters. I think it even mentions it. I don't know why the book of Enoch is not in the Bible, like in the canon, but it's not. But it does have some gravy in it. I haven't really read a lot of it. I've just kind of heard. I just kind of understand, like, he did not die. He was taken up, and just that was the end. But it took me a long time to really come to terms with it because they're like, oh, don't talk to dead people, don't do this, don't do that. But are they really dead if they went to heaven? Aren't they living forever? And while I don't agree with many of the things of the Catholic Church or many of the things of other churches, I think that there is something true about um, people who did get caught up. They're not they're not dead. So we see that in the Mount of Transfiguration that they're not dead because Moses, um, who was it? Moses was there. There's two characters on the Mount of Transfiguration that Peter and John wanted to erect a tabernacle for both of them because they showed up. They're alive. Moses came what more than 2,000 years before Jesus, maybe somewhere around 2,000 years. They're still alive. They were still alive. And I think once we connect more with the spiritual realm, that spirit, the heaven, with heaven, we'll start to acknowledge that there is more alive, that they're in those two parts of the spirit. So you have us be here, and then you have, uh, well, you have us here, and then you have um, our spirits where we're connected into heaven. And we do need to kind of get to a place where it's not, oh, I have to be perfect. It's, oh, I am in that spirit of forgiveness. I'm in that spirit of receivership where I'm receiving these gifts from God. I'm receiving the comforter that is showing me this way. I'm trying to think of other characters that um, are good representations. Obviously, Jesus is one of them. And if you read in the Gospels and you see where he kind of sneaks, doesn't sneak away, but it's like they can't find him. So Elijah's one of them. Elijah at King Ahab, I think so he had a guy come up to him and he's like, "Yeah, I'm Elijah." And they're like, "Oh man, we've been searching everywhere for you and nobody can find you." Right? Nobody can find you. King Ahab's looking for you, has words with you. He wants to talk to you. And King Ahab was so frustrated because he couldn't find him. And I think it's because he was able um, to connect with heaven. So he was so connected that he was able to basically disappear, just like Jesus disappeared within the crowds. You got tons of these eyes on you. Everyone is wanting to be around you, and you just disappear. They couldn't find him. And if I don't know if you guys ever watched The Chosen, but in season 3, there's a lot of discussions where like we can't find him. We don't know where he is. He like goes and leaves. Nobody knows where he is. His disciples don't know where he is. And I think part of that is his connection to heaven. Like he is our example. All right. The Book of Enoch is just a bonus feature. It was a different Enoch, but it's probably a discussion for another time. Oh, the Book of Enoch is a different Enoch than the Enoch that was taken up. Well, regardless, there is some gravy there because it's things that Jesus was doing actively here on earth. Okay. Oh, I don't know what that means. Okay. So here in in the Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Um, he's talking about how God, Yoveh Vave, is taking care of his needs. He's walking with him, like they're connected. They're having this really awesome friendship. And says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," and we can look at everything like I look at everything like, "Oh, okay, if you're telling me that I have to die in order to go to heaven, like, you're worshiping death." Like, I don't think it's a, "You have to die in order to get here." I don't even think we have to die. I think that we can rise above that. "I will fear no evil." And then, in verse 5, it says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Who does that? Like, you're in this, interesting experience where you're having your enemies with you, and then, your enemies are all watching you. They're all hungering after, like, wanting to destroy you or get you. And mind you, this is like his children, his own his own like product of his loins are coming after him. Maybe not necessarily for this, but there's a lot of other psalms that would kind of run with that. Um, but preparing this table, so he's getting all these blessings from God because he's willing to lay his life, his our physical temporal life down for a relationship with the heavenly kingdom. And so having this table prepared in front of your enemies I don't know, that's always been a fascinating picture. Understand that with Owen, like how Owen has almost this table prepared before him, and then all of his enemies are kind of like looking back and like watching. Oh, that, And then surely goodness and mercy shall follow me in all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So, what does that mean? What does that mean? You want to dwell in the house of the Lord forever? It's like you want to be a part of that kingdom. And he was blessed with goodness and mercy. And yeah, he still did make mistakes, sure, after this. There were still errors that he made that were um that he had to make payment for. That God was like, "Okay, you did this, so now this is going to happen because of that decision." One of the things that I'm thinking of is when David numbered his army, and he was strictly told not to do that, and I think he was told while he was doing it not to do it. But there was this, there's a sense of pride that comes up. How many people do I have in my army? And when he got the number, he realized that he made a poor decision. Um, when that was over, he realized he made this poor decision, and then God's like, "Okay, you can choose whichever of these curses. Like, this is what's going to happen. You can choose which one, though." So he gave him three decisions, and so he chose to put his hands into the. He's like, "I don't want to be in the hands of men. I'll prefer to be in your hands. So whatever you want to deal to me, I um what do they call it when you're like, it's like I relinquish to you or whatever. It's like, okay. Okay, Barbara says, nothing would make your enemies cringe more than seeing you prosper in spite of them. Yeah, exactly. And I imagine, like, because he went, correct me if I'm wrong, like, he, like, annihilated so many different peoples in that area, like laid waste like conquered so much that when he finally was um in his older years and ready to send the kingdom over, it's like that King Solomon had so much peace, he had so much wealth, he like had everything laid out for him. Baho. Moon King says, I'm looking forward to death. Can't wait to see the glory of heaven and reconnect with lost friends and family members and meeting ancestors. Who says you have to wait for death, though? I think that's a grabble. Do you think it's appropriate to collect debts in heaven? Moon King. You're storing up your riches in heaven while you're here. Just remember that. Okay, so all of David's life is a really good example of God's protection that you can have. Thanks, poor. Thanks, poor. um, David is a really good example of having that protection from God and how his spirit was while he was doing it. So you can read all the Psalms and really see like all of the spiritual connection that he had with God. Not only like having these really impactful um, Psalms, but even like in his life facing Goliath, like everybody's heard that story. There's first egg on YouTube. That was the first egg on YouTube, Port Bear. It's an orange one or brown one. um, so as we're kind of getting outside of this, like really desiring this outward protection, and a lot of these protections, it kind of shows up in really odd ways. So it shows up in like people relying on science or the medical institutions to protect them from illness. And I think it was uh, Sheila. She had mentioned that she was reading about King Asa and how King Asa had this. So this is after King David, but King Asa, he had this foot issue that he was dealing with. So he's dealing with this foot issue. He goes, he gets it checked out, and um, he gets it checked out, and he calls his physician, and then God like lays down the hammer. Like, you didn't trust me. You went to a physician. You went to a doctor instead of trusting me. And King Asa is considered a good king. Okay, so 1 minute 12. All right. So as a recap, um, our parents are our first protections, and so really honoring your father and your mother, it's going to be a representation of honoring like the trust and love from God and the wisdom that you gain from these things and having wisdom nurture you. King David loved to party. King David did love to party. I remember his wife was standing up, I think is um, Mikiel. How do you say it? She's up there looking down at him, watching him dance and have a good time, and she's just feels this hatred in her heart towards him. So yeah. Um, so even though like we can have like certain feelings about our parents, like really honor your father and your mother as much as you can, forgive them and like let go of whatever hurts there was. You have an opportunity to correct those things now. And uh, these key points about David of how he acknowledges his mistakes, he recognizes his weaknesses, he he is courageous and steps up to any challenge, and he steps up to it with God's permission. He waits for God to give him the go ahead for the most part. He has a strong passion and love for God. Like he really does put him first, and he has got the strength to change. No, it's Moon King, Moon King Bear. So, all right. That's kind of all I had for that. I thought that was a pretty in depth and brief conversation that we could have on that. Do you guys have any other comments, protests? I am going to be on the Over Sharon podcast with Bonanza Bear and Sharon Bear. I think it's Sharon Bear. Tomorrow, I don't know when that will post up, but I'll see if I can put a link and pop it into my channel here. And we'll kind of be going over some of the same kind of stuff we talk here, and maybe more. I don't know where it'll be led, but yeah. Barbara said, "I noticed each generation in our family becoming better parents. So encouraging." Yeah, well, that's. I think as we come, like, I think as we're continuing to go, I think like from what I'm observing is that we're seeing the veils become thinner or lifted or whatever you want to call it, where the truth is coming out and being exposed. Like we call this the apocalypse, or this is like a revealing of truth or a truth reveal, as the apocalypse. And that's kind of where we're in right now. And we can see how that is playing out. I'm Monkey, the funny one. Um, and even beyond just becoming better parents, like I've noticed the children that come that are being born right now that are like they're super conscious, and they're just really it's almost like they have this inner wisdom, and maybe it's us just kind of letting kids be kids, but it's just a really interesting thing to kind of observe as a parent, and then as just a general observer of people, like, oh, okay, oh, that kid, like they really have a lot of inner wisdom with them. So yes, Brandon and Sharon. So I'll post a I'll post when that. I don't know if it's a live or if it's something that's going to be posted the following week, but that is what my plan is tomorrow. So we'll see how that goes. Um, but yeah, I think the parents, even though like we kind of have this longevity going for us as a part of what we're going through with like life extension. I think that's all kind of gifts of God. Oh man, 105 inches. That's what she said. Is that what I said earlier about Goliath? I tried to do the math. Let's do the math. 17.5 times 6. It's 105 inches. Plus a span, though. So it's 6 cubits and a span. And I don't know the length of a span. I think it's like from the center, the hip or something, to the end of your arm. So yeah, I'm working on seeds too. Oh man, it's my favorite YouTube celebrity. Okay. All right. Well, so I'll be on Over Sharon podcast. I'll post that on my IG, and I'll post that here once the video becomes available. And yeah, I hope this was helpful for you guys. It's something that's kind of popped up and been in um, the synchronicity area, with like Woodshop's letter, which was really powerful and incredible, and just a lot of the other letters that were being shared. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Oh, I am going to try and start having guests on my stream. So once I figure out how, I'm going to figure out how to do that here soon, to be streaming one in multiple areas, and then also I had, yeah, Port Bear. This week's letters were amazing, and yeah, we never went to the moon for real. Like, prove it. Prove we went to the moon. You can't. We just didn't. Um, what was I saying? Oh, I can't remember. But yeah, these the letters this week were great. Oh yeah, I'm gonna try and start streaming this in multiple locations. So I started a Twitch and I started some other areas. So I'll start practicing on how to do that. I had to learn how to use technology. And then I do want to start bringing on guests, probably starting in March, sometime in March. That's my goal. So, all right, you guys, I hope you had a wonderful evening. Take care. Have a great weekend. And I hope that this was um, edifying for you. And I look forward to talking with you guys next week on our next topic. So, have a good evening. Cheers. And I will see you guys later. Barely Boxing Championship is June 2nd, 2023 in San Diego, California. And if you don't know, now you know.